Back in November 2022, I had the chance to test out the Velotric Nomad 1 fat tire e-bike. This was one of the first fat tire bikes that I tested, and it is the only one that has been kept in my personal collection over the past few years. For the past month, I've been riding another fat tire e-bike from Velotric, and the company keeps showing me why it remains one of my favorite brands for all e-bike riding that I do. Hello everybody, this is Matthew Miller, otherwise known as Palm Solo, and thanks for visiting the Mobile with Matt YouTube channel. Please subscribe for more reviews and to support this channel. And if you enjoy the content, share it on your social networks and with your family and friends too. As I said, I've tested Velotric bikes in the past, and I've been overjoyed with the performance of the Summit 1 EMTB that I purchased more than a year ago. I was excited to try out the successor to the Nomad in the form of the Nomad 2, and Velotric did not disappoint. Let's first unbox the Velotric Nomad 2, and then I'll get into the details and my riding experiences. The Velotric Nomad 2 arrived in a fairly typical box, including the Apple Find My and the UL certifications on the outside. Given that this is a fat tire bike that's quite heavy, I decided the easiest way to access this was to cut open the front panel of the box and pull it down. And then the first thing to do is, of course, start with that front wheel and tire and get that in place on that RST front shock, which is nice to see. Then you can put the fender on there, and no worries to have that front tire and wheel in place, and the fender goes right on there, along with next the front light and handlebars. The handlebars are pretty easy to put on there with the 4 bolts, and they are lovely swept back handlebars that are very comfortable to ride with. As you can see on the bike, the rear rack is mounted by default as well as that rear tire, and most all of my effort was spent on those front handlebars, because after that you simply put on the pedals and the bike is just about ready to go. As you saw in the unboxing, and as you can see in front of me, Velotric sent along its gorgeous cranberry color and step-through frame design in large for me to test out. This bike is available with either a step-through frame or a high step frame in regular and large sizes, so make sure to check the website for the size that fits you best. The step through that I tested is this lovely cranberry color, but it's also available in slate, olive, and midnight blue. The high step frame design is available in sage and midnight blue, with the MSRP on the bike at $1,999. So let's start off, as in typical fashion, with some key specifications of the Nomad 2. It's constructed of that typical 6000 series aluminum alloy metal material, and I don't know if you can see, but you can see in the pictures that I have attached to this video, the welding is fabulous, the construction is great, it's really, really well designed. The bike weighs in at 75 pounds, which is fairly typical for a fat tire e-bike, but it does have a very high capacity of 505 pounds. And the rear rack that came with this bike, and it's attached with 4 different bolts, has a capacity of 66 pounds. The bike has a 750 watt rear hub motor with 90 Newton meters of torque. And the battery that's under here is a 48 volt, 14.7 amp hour, 705.6 watt hour battery. That is rated for IPX7, so it can go in splashable water and things. It also has UL 2271 and UL 2580 certifications. One unique thing I'll talk about a little bit later is that the Velotric Nomad 2 has both torque and cadence sensor options that are controlled by you, the rider. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It has 5 levels of pedal assist with 3 different riding modes, Eco, Trail, and Boost, so 15 different riding experiences are available to you. Has a left thumb throttle as well, up to 28 miles per hour in pedal assist. It's advertised 20 miles per hour in throttle, but that is adjustable as well, up to that 28 miles per hour, and an advertised range in throttle only mode of up to 45 miles and up to 65 miles in pedal assist. Now that advertised range, of course, is for a lighter rider than I am and on different conditions. The Nomad 2 has RST32 guide front suspension system. Those hydraulic shocks have 100 millimeters of range with lockout as well. It has a suspension seat post and Tektro hydraulic disc brakes, 203 millimeter disc brakes on the front and 180 millimeter rotor brakes on the back. The bike sports those Kenda 26-inch by 4-inch fat tires, and those are puncture-resistant tires as well. And on the right, we have Shimano 8-speed shifting with that really handy shifters right underneath the hand grip, which I love. That front light is very, very bright at 130 lux, and it's auto sensing, so it can sense the dark or the light, so it can be automatic or manual. It also has rear lights, and those rear lights can serve as brake lights, and also, I'll talk a little bit later, turn signal lights in both steady and flashing mode. Has a vibrant 3.5-inch color LCD display with USB-C for charging your phone, and I'll talk about that display and the controls in depth here in a second. The bike also is IPX6 rated for the bike electronics with UL 2849 for the fire safety electrical systems. The bike has a very good smartphone application and Apple Find My support. So let's talk a little bit about the controller. This is the most advanced controller I've seen on any bike I've tested. And it may seem a little overwhelming at first, but let's talk about it. So it does have 7 different buttons on this controller. That top button is simply to toggle the power on and off. You press and hold it to power it on, and press and hold it again to turn it off. The next 2 buttons, pretty much on the front face at the top, those are simply turn signal indicators. You press once on the right or the left to turn on the turn signal, and then press that same turn signal again to turn that off. Now, when you do press the turn signal indicator, that lovely large display will have a yellow arrow that shows that the turn signal is on. So you have very good awareness of the turn signals and if they're on or off. So if you look down and you see that turn signal on and you're no longer turning, make sure to turn it off. There's a small button to the right of the right turn signal indicator just below it, and that is the menu button. You press and hold this button to access the vast number of settings that I'll talk about in more detail. You can also will use that as an OK button while you're in menus, and also when you're just on the regular display and you're not in the settings, if you just press that once, it will toggle through the different metrics on the bottom of the display, such as odometer, maximum speed, average speed, and more. And of course, as we move down the controllers, the plus and minus buttons are used to increase or decrease your pedal assist levels, and it also will move through the menus. One other thing is those turn signal indicators may move right and left through some of the menus, while the plus and minus will move up and down through some of those menus. If you press and hold the plus button, that will manually toggle on the lights or off the lights if you're not in auto mode. And if you press and hold the minus button, that will enable that 2-mile-per-hour walking mode to help you walk the bike around rather than having to push a fairly heavy bike. Way down on the bottom left is a button that's very handy and something that I did not have on my Summit 1. That is the switching main mode button. So if you press that button, it'll bounce between the Eco, the Trail, and the Boost modes. And it also, when you're in the menus, that serves as the back button. So there's a lot to get used to. I do suggest that you spend some time with the controller because of all of those buttons. However, once you get used to that, I actually prefer this controller over my Summit 1 because it gives me direct access to the pressing and accessing those modes of Eco, Trail, and Boost much more simply than anything else. And those turn signal indicators are very handy when you're not in a EMTB situation, but you're out on the road and things like that. So it makes it very easy to switch between those modes and to control this whole experience. And then there's not a button, but way down below that mode button is a rubber cover. And underneath that cover is a USB-C port that you can use to charge up your accessories, such as your bike computer and maybe even your phone, although the power balance may be something to consider. But it's pretty rare that we see USB-C being used for charging, so that's great to see. Now the display on this bike compared to my Summit 1, the Summit 1 is more of a vertical oriented display, and I think it's 2.8 inches. This is a landscape oriented display that is 3.5 inches. It is a very large, and the funny thing is when I see 3.5 inches, that used to be what some of the PDAs of the smartphones I started testing had a display of that size, and now that is a display on my bike. But that display menu is incredible. It shows you so much information. You can completely access everything that you want on the bike. This includes the riding modes, the speed limits, the screen brightness, and the auto power off, auto light, throttle limited settings, rear light mode settings, whether you want it riding while it's steady, or like what I like to have is I like to have enhanced mode so that when I brake, it actually flashes those lights. You can control all of that. You can control the units, the connect to the smartphone application, and the Find My, all through the settings that are on this display. And when you're in the regular display, you see everything very clearly, what mode you're in, what speed you're doing. You'll see a little plot of the power that's being attached and supplied to you. It's a very informative display, and I really, really enjoy that on the Nomad 2. In addition to that display, you can control everything on the bike and customize the bike to your liking on the display on the bike itself, or you simply scan the QR code and open up the Velotric smartphone application. That application has everything that's mirrored here is mirrored on that application, in addition to the firmware updates. So the firmware updates are pretty important, and I highly recommend you do get the smartphone application, because that firmware updates, they manage the firmware for the display, for the controller, and the battery. So there could be up to 3 firmware updates available to you depending on what part of your bike is being updated. And Velotric has been known to tweak those settings, so stay up to date on the firmware. You can also name the bike, you can check out the riding mode, the screen brightness, all those other settings. Also, the smartphone application serves as a tracker for your riding adventure, so you can have that turned on when you go ride and track that ride and track your distances and speeds and see some of the basic stats of your riding. So the Velotric Nomad 2 has 15 different mode and level options. And I really couldn't test the range and the functionality of every single one of those, because even within those, you could set maximum throttle and assist speeds and levels as well. So you can really customize this bike exactly to how you like to. So I'm going to share some of my typical scenarios, because I didn't have a full year in advance of the embargo to write this review and test it and everything else. So the one test that I typically do, and especially with a bike like this, is riding into the neighborhood, up that 13 to 15% incline. And if you remember my Summit 1 review, and feel free to check that out, that bike was able to get me up the hill with throttle only. And it was one of the rare bikes that I've ever tested where I never had to use any pedal assist at all to get up that hill. That bike, the Summit 1, has that same 750 watt motor and the specifications of 90 Newton meters of torque. However, the Summit 1 is also 13 pounds lighter than the Nomad 2, and it doesn't have the big fat 4-inch tires. It has the narrower, I think it's 2.5-inch tires, some mountain bike tires, and it's a lighter bike with less friction on the road. So that bike, I was able to go throttle only up the hill. In this bike, I was able to get up part of the hill with the throttle, but then I had to go into pedal assist 5, put it in that lowest gear, and then I was able to maintain 10 miles, 11 miles per hour up that steepest hill. So I understand that this is a fat tire bike. It's a bit bulkier and heavier than the Summit 1, so I didn't really expect it to get throttle all the way up the hill with my weight and the bike's weight. Many people that are much lighter than my 240 pounds may be able to go up every hill with throttle only, so it just depends on the rider. A bike like this is really fun to ride with just the throttle, and so that left thumb throttle is real easy to access. It does have a cruise control option, which some bikes don't, and I really love that. You are in control of that. You can turn that on or you can turn that off. If you turn that on, you can set that cruise control, and let your thumb rest while you ride. So in my testing with throttle only, I was able to get a range of about 30 to 35 miles. Advertised range is 45 miles for a lighter person, so that 30 to 35 for me is actually pretty accurate. I'm a bit heavy. It was a fairly flat conditions on pavement, but there was some incline. It's hard to find a completely flat area to test it on, and it was rain as well, which might slow it down a bit. Now, just giving you some numbers, right? So you can, as I said earlier, in that controller, you can specify the maximum speed that's attainable with the throttle. I had it set up in boost mode with the throttle set to 24 miles per hour maximum. So in level 0, there is no throttle at all. If you have it in pedal assist level 0, you're not going to get any throttle out of that or pedal assist. It's just like riding a bike. In level 1, I was seeing 11 miles per hour max. Level 2, 13 miles per hour. Level 3 was about 17 miles per hour. Level 4, 20, and then level 5, 24 miles. So if you set that throttle limit to 28 miles per hour, you're going to see a range, and it varies about 3 or 4 miles per hour each time you go up to a different assist level. And you can even knock that throttle range down to a maximum of 15 and then see the associated. So it's really nice to have the pedal assist level that you set also limit the speed on the throttle. Some bikes, and most bikes that I've tested, as soon as you turn it on level 1 through level 5, you will see the throttle go full 20 miles per hour at every one of those levels. It's really nice to have that fine control that every level that you set it as is the level of your throttle speed. So that's great. As fun as the throttle is, it does eat up your battery pretty quickly. So I usually spend most of my time in some kind of pedal assist. And on this bike, because of the size of the bike, while I normally spend my time in pedal assist 1 or 2, on this bike, I pretty much kept it most of the time in pedal assist 2 and 3, which provided more than I needed ample assistance. Trail mode was also the mid-level mode, was nice to ride. And of course, eco, trail, or boost, your consumption will change and it will vary wildly. In the eco mode at a 2-3, I was able to get about 50 to 55 miles. The advertised range is 65, but that's for a lighter person, probably eco mode 1 or 2 or something like that. So I would guess about 50 miles for myself. For you, make sure you get out there, test it a little bit. You don't want to be stuck without any battery, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then with pedal assist, I put it into boost mode and put it on pedal assist 5. I was able to go pedal assist and get about 32 miles per hour with me working a little bit and the bike working as well. Eco mode does limit pedal assist to 20 miles per hour, so that's good to know. And unlike an EMTB, I'm not taking this bike out there and jumping hills and doing all kinds of mountain bike riding, but I do enjoy riding it on forest trails and things that are pretty involved but not too crazy. And I took this bike out and I was riding on some mud. There was some roots across the trees. It was wet, things like that. And in the past, some of the fat tire bikes kind of got away from me, and it got a little bit scary. The bike was big and heavy. It had a lot of power. It got away from me too much. I always felt in control with the Nomad 2. It's a good size, a good weight, with all of those customizations on the settings that you have. I really felt in complete control on the trails, so that was great. And range is really tough to estimate on those mountain trails like that because you're bouncing between throttle mode and pedal assist. You're going up, you're going down, everything else. So I'm not going to really give you a range for those kind of modes just because it was really difficult to track that with such a varied riding experience. Now, if the battery dies, this bike, it's tough to ride with no assist at all. This is a heavy bike. It has large fat tires. I was able to pedal with it and ride with it, but I would not want to do that for very long. So keep an eye on the battery level and know that you have full control over those settings. You can easily adjust those and reduce the battery consumption to a different mode. Now, a little bit on the pros and cons of this bike. I would have to say it's mostly all pros. The Nomad 1 was one of the first fat tire e-bikes that I tested, and it continues to be the only one in my collection that I continue to ride today. And the Nomad 2 takes things to the next level with several improvements that I'll talk about in a second, especially in the design, the controller, and many different aspects. It is clearly the best fat tire e-bike that I have tested to date, and I can't wait to ride it some more. There's a lot of available power, and the modes that you can use to optimize your riding experience are fantastic. There's the torque and the cadence sensor technology and the ability to switch between that on the bike itself. Now that is really nice to have and something I've rarely seen on a bike. And actually, I would think that I would go with the torque mode, which most fat tire bikes have, but I actually prefer the cadence mode and really enjoyed that whole experience. Now, Velotric does say that using the cadence mode will consume a bit more battery, so be careful with that, but do try both cadence and torque sensing to see what fits your riding experience better. It is an extremely comfortable bike to ride. It has that lovely kind of swept back handlebar design. It has ergonomic rubber grips on there. The thumb access for the throttle and for the shifter are just fantastic. There was no reaching involved or anything else. It also has that suspension seat post, so even though it doesn't have rear shocks, that suspension seat post makes it very comfortable with that wide seat as well. And I just want to cruise on this thing for hours and hours. That controller, even though it has a lot of buttons, it is provides you with clear and ready access to everything. It is a very capable controller, and that user interface is fantastic. I also love the turn signals, which can be very handy when you're out on the trail and you want to let people know what's going on. I always got to find a couple of areas for improvement, even if there really isn't many. This one doesn't have rear suspension, but as I mentioned, that suspension seat post, the tires, and everything else makes it for a very comfortable ride. And of course, one thing I would always love on a bike like this is I would love to have 100-mile battery life, right? That one's tough because there's so many different modes and limits, and each person weighs different, your terrain is different, and the only way to really increase that with current battery technology is a bigger battery or an additional battery. That adds weight, that adds size and everything else. So I'll mention battery life. I would love to have more, because who wouldn't? But I understand that's really not something that can be done, and this is the best compromise to be able to give you the flexibility on all those different modes. As I mentioned earlier in this video, the price of this bike is $1,999. This test model came, as you can see, with the rear rack, the fenders on the front and the back, and that suspension seat post. I'm not quite sure if that's included with that $19.99 price. I didn't get that information before the embargo lifted, so take a look at that. You can also purchase a front basket, mirrors, there's water bottle accessible holders, and much more from Velotric. The Velotric Nomad 2 improves upon the already excellent Nomad 1 in many areas, including higher torque, higher load carrying capacity, a beefy rear rack, better front suspension, twice the brightness on the front light, turn signal indicators, that modern display and fantastic controller similar to what we saw with the Summit 1, and more. The color is stunning, and it's one of the best built bikes I have ever tested. It's rock solid, it's comfortable, it is a fabulous bike ride, and I highly recommend you give that a try. That display and controller and the customization is amazing. I normally don't spend a lot of time riding fat tire e-bikes, but this one is so good that I've been riding it in snow, on trails, and on neighborhood rides, because you can optimize the riding experience, and it is so comfortable. You know, my Summit 1 is a great eMTB, but those handlebars are a little bit wider, and it's very focused on that particular experience. This is kind of a cruiser bike, and a do-everything bike. And I'm gonna have to say, I'm gonna keep this fat tire bike for a long time. One of the only fat tire bikes, as I said, that I kept is the Nomad 1. The Nomad 2 is fantastic, and I highly recommend you take a closer look at it. Thank you everybody for watching. Please subscribe and share. Interact with me here, and stay tuned for more coverage of e-bikes, wearables, and other mobile technology. And may the mobile force be with you.